Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. I'm here with my co-host Nick Olson. We don't have Greg tonight. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I've had enough time at this point to sufficiently mourn the first terrible loss of the Viking season. We knew it was coming at some point. It always comes as soon as you open your heart up to the Vikings, as soon as you make yourself vulnerable to them. That's when they twist the knife. That's when Lucy pulls the football and we wind up Charlie Brown on our back. So I've had some time now to process it, and we've ground the all-22 so that you don't have to. So we're excited to dive in. And then, nice thing about a Monday night game is we get to move on very quickly and get the taste out of our mouths. So we'll preview the Lions game as well as we dive into that too, and hopefully come away with a win there. Much easier matchup at least compared to the Eagles. I hope so.
Yeah,
Hopefully
it
that'll
does.
be.
It does kind of compress the timeline a bit to turn around when you're watching that tape because you're like, all right, Tuesday, Wednesday, I got to get this done before the next week of football starts up already again. But it's and like you said, the Vikings, man, it's just like a roller coaster ride every freaking time, right? It's we beat the Packers, we're all high off of that. We're all like gung ho, let's go. We're gonna beat the Eagles, and then it's a disaster. So
Yeah,
really
and
just
it's
an
pretty crazy
impressive
because
performance.
the Packers are a good team, and we blew them out wire to wire. So, the potential is there for it to think that, like, hey, maybe, it's only one game to want to overreact, but this team looked really good against a team that's supposed to be really good. So that's really promising. And we go into the Eagles, and granted, the Eagles are a really good team too, but to be manhandled the way that we were by the Eagles, probably even more dominantly. The Eagles probably beat us even more dominantly than the Vikings beat the Packers. Yeah, you're back to square one, being like, this is this is a 500 team with talent and potential to be more than that, but we'll see if it actually reaches that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this is probably our two of our more difficult games on the schedule coming out in the first 2 weeks. So ending up 1-1 after those first two games isn't certainly is nowhere near the end of the world for the Viking season. I think the Eagles have shown, especially if Jalen Hurts plays at the level he has through the first 2 weeks, that they are really a force to reckon with in the NFC. They might be, approaching being NFC favorites here pretty soon, I think. So it's kind of it's not as bad as it might seem from the Vikings loss in general, just because of the quality of opponent they were playing. But
Yeah. I mean, we went into it saying I think we both picked the Eagles. Betting markets had the Eagles. I probably had the Eagles. That's a little bit even worse than that, just because I think schematically I thought they matched up worse with us. And then Hertz came out and played as well as we've
mhm.
ever seen him play. I mean, this was one of those like Jared Goff week 4, 2018. What was that? Just the quarterback goes Super Saiyan. Nick Foles at the link. Same place back in the at 2017 NFC Championship game. Sometimes quarterbacks just go off and you have to tip your cap. So that was Hurts in this game. He was incredible. So maybe we start there and just talk about defensively.
Yeah, so let's
I thought
set
it
the
was.
stage a little bit, right? First, I think we'll kind of go with the flow of the game, where the first half really the story was the Vikings offense is going to get going, but mostly the Eagles offense ruled that half because the Vikings simply could not stop them. They had very long drives, a long time of possession, and obviously the big play. And then in the second half, it was more of an offensive implosion by the Vikings and Kirk Cousins specifically that prevented the Vikings from making this a game later on. So like you said, Nick, let's start off with the Vikings defense versus the Eagles offense in this game.
Yeah, so Eagles had 6 drives in the first half, and they scored on 4 of them, including 3 touchdowns. They had one. Vikings did manage to get one 3-and-out, and penalties helped them a little bit there. They had another drive that they also stalled, but scoring on 4 of your 6 drives, including 3 touchdowns, that's a recipe for disaster. Obviously, they tightened things up a lot. Part of that is the Vikings took the pedal off the gas a little bit, but the defense was able to hold them scoreless in the second half. I think there were a few things going on. The It was interesting listening to Ed Donatell's press conference earlier today because Donatell basically said when we went back and looked at the tape, we basically were able to figure out that it was mostly execution errors rather than fundamental problems with the scheme. I don't know if that's good news or bad because it's probably a little easier to clean up scheme problems than it is to clean up execution problems because
Yep.
execution problems usually means you've got a problem with your personnel.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, there was specifically the worst play of the game was probably giving up that 53-yard touchdown to Quez Watkins. That came as a result of the Vikings playing quarter half against I think was it a dagger concept or was it a and
It
I
was a
think it was
sail concept. It was a flood
yeah, it was
concept and it
blood.
was sail.
Yeah,
So
so you go ahead.
yeah, I'll set the stage a little bit here. And most of my understanding of this comes from Cody Alexander at the underscore coach underscore A on Twitter. He is a series of books called Match Quarters. He's a Texas high school football coach who specializes in quarters. He's a defensive coordinator, so he knows quarters and the Fangio system really, really well. Like he's really dug deep into the bones of this system, and essentially he believes the call by the Vikings on that was Zeus 6, which was Zeus to Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith was on the weak side of the passing formation, so that means in Zeus you're giving half field coverage help to a specific player, and it's notable that it was actually 12 personnel by the Eagles on this play, so AJ Brown wasn't in the game, so they called it to Devontae Smith. That meant that they had quarters on the trips side, and the Eagles ran sail, which is a three-person route concept. You have a vertical route. In this case, it was almost a straight vertical, but it was more up the seam because there was a condensed split from the wide receiver. It was a little bit of a post, but not so much of a post. And then there's a corner route. In this case, it was by a tight end, and then there's a route into the flat. And against quarters, the way the quarters half of this play works, the outside corner and the standard is 9 to 10 yards. If the receiver is vertical after 9 to 10 yards, you have to take that player the entire way. Is the way this quarter's coverage is taught, essentially. So you have the wide receiver going vertical. He's the most outside. That outside corner in this responsibility has mod coverage, and then the linebacker has the responsibility to carry the number two up to the safety, whose responsibility is number two when number two is vertical. Okay? So in this case, with the outside receiver running straight vertical, that should have activated Cameron Dantzler in mod coverage, where he now has that player in man for the rest of the play and he should follow it. But what happened is Cameron Dantzler kind of peaked and he saw the tight end was breaking out on a sail route and he wanted to try to jump that sail route, which should have been passed off to Cam Bynum. And Cam Bynum is also driving on that sail route, and that's how Quez Watkins ends up running wide open, because Cam Bynum says, I'm responsible for this sail route. I need to go drive on the corner route, while Cam Dantzler is trying to peek and steal, kind of cheat a little bit on the sail route. He lets the wide receiver go wide open, and ultimately, my understanding is that it's Cameron Dantzler's fault. And I think the fact that Cameron Dantzler was out of the game later, was benched later after another play where AJ Brown ended up wide open in the slant, is a pretty good indication to us that the coaching staff also thought it was Cameron Dantzler's fault that this was a touchdown.
Yeah, actually, Ed Donatel actually came out and said it was Dancer's fault on that play, alleviating, lifting some of the burden from poor
Yes.
Cam Bynum, who Troy Aikman wrongly identified as being responsible for the coverage
I mean, I'm
bust.
not gonna
Which
lie. I thought it was Bynum at the time too. Like, I think I
it
tweeted
certainly
that it
looked
was
like
Bynum.
it. It certainly looked like it. But then on the L22, you can tell it was a box check versus the bunch, and it plays out the way
Mm-hmm.
you're a mod on one. So
Exactly.
Dancer should have carried Watkins, and he didn't. Um, don't want to harp on him too much because it's like a split second decision, but it's also like you should know this. This is not an unusual check to make in quarters coverage. It's one of the fundamental rules of the system.
Yeah, it's not
So
like
it's
we didn't run
disappointing.
quarters last year. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Although I guess it's possible that like the way Zimmer ran into more little cover 70 man matchy than Donatel's more 60, 80 variations. Maybe there's different rules. I don't know. Probably not now that I think about it. But in any case, yeah, that was a big mistake on Dancer. And anytime you give up a 53-yard touchdown, that's going to be hard to overcome. And credit obviously to Jalen Hurts, who sees it immediately. As soon as
Yeah.
he sees like Dancer peel off the vertical, he chucks it up deep. And Bynum actually makes a really good play. Credit to Bynum for like covering up, trying at least to cover up for
Mm-hmm.
Dancer's mistakes. Like he immediately peels off the intermediate sort of corner route or out route on the flood concept. tries to carry Watkins, and that's actually what makes Bynum end up looking bad, is he was the one trying to cover for Dantzler's mistake. But so you had that problem. You also had on the third touchdown, they were driving down the field, and Jalen Hurts had a 26-yard zone option read option play, where it was 3rd and 2. So I think the Vikings were in cover one. When you're in those third and short situations, you often play man coverage to avoid kind of getting. It makes it a little bit easier in the run fits, and it also makes it a little easier to, like make sure you get a stop. Man coverage, I think, is the risk with man coverage is you can get beat over the top a little bit easier, but for short yard situations, you just kind of want to get a stop, and that's what's most important to get off the field. So Vikings were in cover one, and Hunter was supposed to crash down on, was supposed to read the handoff, and Hurts pulled it and went out around, and Hunter instead went to tackle. I think it was Kenneth Gainwell, who was the sort of the option player there. It's possible that there was supposed to be what's called a scrape exchange, where the end, in this instance, Hunter will crash down no matter what, and the linebacker sort of peels over and fills in the gap on the other end. But I didn't see that from Hicks, so I always want to approach this with some humility and acknowledge, like, we don't necessarily know the calls,
So
but from the
what
way
I think here, what I think happened on that play actually was, I think it was, but the scrape exchange was actually Harrison Smith, because you see Harrison Smith screaming down, and then Goddard comes across the formation in kind of a split zone look, right? It was a slide or a split zone look, and Harrison Smith sticks to him, right? And Goddard actually wasn't blocking him. I remember live, it was like Harrison Smith was basically holding Dallas Goddard, right? But he stuck with him, and I think that block kind of confused Harrison Smith a little bit. And I think what should have happened on that play is when Goddard goes in motion across the formation, Hicks should follow him in motion to the outside, is my understanding of what should happen on that play. That's a guess on my end. So I do think it was a little bit on Hicks, because he went after the running back. But if he's in man coverage on the running back in that play, and it actually should have been Kendricks coming over, that's a difficult position to put Kendricks in, because he has to cross linemen then. Like, Hicks was really the only person with the chance to stop it. So if he was in man coverage on the running back, I don't know if it's necessarily on him either.
Yeah. So, and regardless of whose fault it is, Hurts winds up in the open field without anybody on him. Smith isn't really able to turn around in time. I mean, they're able to tackle him, I think, in the low red zone eventually. And Bynum's supposed to. I mean, he's the only like deep safety in this, but Bynum wasn't really. He didn't take the greatest of angles. And him, the two safeties, and then I think might have been Patrick Peterson as well. I got in on a gang tackle, but Jalen Hurts is just so strong, he was able to muscle into the end zone. A couple other plays on that drive. They started out that drive. It was getting into not 2 minutes, but it was like in 5 minutes. So I think they went empty. Yep. The Eagles went empty with 5, and the Vikings were in their penny formation, where it's 5 defensive linemen, or really 3 defensive linemen, 2 outside linebackers, so the pass rushers. Basically 5 people on the line of scrimmage, and you're 1 linebacker back, and then your nickel personnel behind it. So not like the normal 4-2 nickel that we're used to, but it's heavier. And the Eagles exploited that by coming out and going shotgun empty. And so the Vikings had to defend that by sort of checking to basically winding up with DJ Wanham lined up against against Devontae Smith, that's just, you have to tip your cap to the play callers and being able to scheme that up. So they had back-to-back basically explosives, or maybe 15 20-yard completions to Devontae Smith right away, and the Vikings got gashed for it twice before they switched back to 4-2, so that they could actually have defensive backs on,
and Jordan Hicks in coverage instead of Wanham.
Yeah. Well, it's better than Wanham. So that was there was some offensive scheming that I think you have to be a little bit more aware of. When you're in penny fronts and they go empty, and even if they're only in 11 personnel, even if they're in 12 personnel, they can pull one on you by putting their star wide receiver in the slot, and then that's not the matchup you want. And in fact, that's exactly what the Vikings did in Week 1 to Preston Smith, with Justin Jefferson in the slot going empty. So it's kind of a taste of our own medicine there. On the first drive, they eventually punched that in with, I think, more read option. But what really did them in on that first touchdown drive was a series of long third down conversions.
Yes.
And it's always like they gave up a first down on 3rd and 13. That's a backbreaker for a defense. And I don't know. It was really hard to diagnose the coverage, but it wound up with Harrison Smith driving on an out route against I think it was Devontae Smith again.
Yep.
And that it's tough. It looks, Matt, you and I were actually going back and forth on whether this was cover 9, weak rotated cover 3, as in the Fangio system would call it cover 9, or whether it was quarters to that side. And it kind of looks like quarters because Harrison Smith is backpedaling, but then why does he match on Devontae Smith driving down instead of Hicks in the flat? In any case, Eagles found a good matchup. They seem to know what the Vikings coverage responsibilities would be there, and that Harrison Smith, because he's backpedaling at the snap, isn't really able to make a play on that. There was another one that
Yep.
they gave up a deep completion where Patrick Peterson fell over. It wasn't like, I mean, it's just a bad play, but
Well,
he lost his
that
footing.
one was a dig route too. So actually, I think
Yeah.
Bynum should have drove on that one, and I think there was kind of an overarching theme with the Vikings coverage in those long situations, and I think it just we weren't tight enough in zone. On that Devontae Smith completion that you talked about, Jordan Hicks is over him at the snap. He's a little bit inside of him, but he's over him. He should probably match tighter to him, try to reroute him at the top of his stem, and give Harrison Smith an extra step there. I still don't think he gets it. I think it was a good route concept versus the coverage that the Vikings were running. Harrison Smith has to come to the inside and drive on the ball that's going all the way outside, so it's very difficult for him to get there. I think it was a good play call, ultimately. And then but the Vikings had a couple of instances where Cam Bynum and Harrison Smith were playing digs, and that Patrick Peterson one was one. Peterson did fall down. It was a good route by Quez Watkins. Peterson would be trail help in that scenario, but you also have that safety who's supposed to drive down on that dig route when it gets thrown. And there was another one to AJ Brown later in the game where Harrison Smith was supposed to drive down, and I think it was another like second and long because the Eagles worked themselves into those situations often early in the game with penalties. Right? They had 3 illegal man downfield calls, they had another pass interference call, and they were able to get that yardage back almost immediately. It seemed like every single time. And I think that's just because of the looseness. They were finding the holes in the zones where the Vikings were playing. And the safeties, while Harrison Smith was basically making a tackle as soon as the player caught the ball, he wasn't able to contest any of the passes, right? Cam Bynum wasn't able to contest any of the passes. The Vikings in general weren't able to contest like any passes in this game. It was pretty frustrating, and I think that spacing is what needs to be cleaned up moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And part of that too is just Jalen Hurts went, we talked about this. He went Super Saiyan. He completed 84% of his
Yeah.
passes, and in the first half, it was almost 100% of his passes. So there were a lot of throws. I saw some people bandying about the stat that like Eagles averaged 3 yards of separation. While that's true, it's not giving credit to how close the underneath defenders came to getting
Yeah.
their hands on some of these balls. So while it might look because of a spot drop zone coverage that like on a dig route or a basic that like AJ Brown is wide open. What's really happening is Eric Kendricks is supposed to be able to take that away, but he made a diving, tried to pass break it up and diving midair, jumped midair. Jalen Hurts was able to just thread the needle right over the top
Yeah,
of
he
him.
did a really good job with that.
So part of it too is just giving Hurts credit for what a tremendous passing performance he put up. Obviously it was great on the ground as well, but it's really the passing performance that did the Vikings in, and through that managing to be efficient on third downs and extend drives. So all this is to say, I think Donatello is generally right that this was an issue of defensively. They were gashed mostly because of execution and not because of the scheme. I don't think when you watch it on film, and Troy Aikman's color commentary probably enforced this narrative that the Vikings were kind of just spamming cover 6, running the same kind of too high concepts, but it really wasn't. Like they always show too high. They do it more than anybody else in the league. But that's the idea: is to force the quarterback to make post-snap processing every single time. Don't give anything away. Make him read it every single time. Don't allow him to speed anything up. Just if it has to take an extra 0.5 seconds for him to read, okay, is it middle field open or closed? Is there a safety in the middle or not? That's always going to be to the defense's advantage. So I don't think it was necessarily like the Donatel scheme was figured out. I don't think that's what was happening here. I think there are things that they need to tighten up, like you mentioned. Guys need to be quicker to, drop to their landmarks, and they need to be tighter in coverage. And they can't allow themselves to get gashed by slot wide receivers and empty being matched up against DJ Wanham. Those are things you can clean up. But for the most part, it was Hurts making incredible throws. and converting on third and longs and giving up a few key explosives due to coverage breakdowns and stuff. So when you put it out like that, I think there's a recipe to fix these sorts of issues going forward. I'm actually in a weird way, I felt a little bit better after grinding all the defensive all 22, just because I felt like actually I like this defensive philosophy. It makes sense to me, and I feel like we're capable of fixing these issues too. So I don't know if you felt similarly or
Yeah,
differently,
so
but
so for me, the question remains to be seen whether or not we'll actually be able to execute on what we're talking about, right? Whether or not we're going to be able to clean up our execution. So that's question number one. Obviously, I do think we have a decent amount of talent. My biggest concern is about the cornerbacks in Patrick Peterson and Cameron Dantzler, which was, I think, a big part of this, right? Because they need to be able to feel comfortable in matching up against their guys on the vertical portions of the route to play up closer. Jalen Hurts did a very good job in this game of taking what was given to him the entire game, with that exception of the coverage bust on the Quez Watkins touchdown. Like, I don't know if he had a single pass. He might have had one pass that was past 15 yards downfield in this game. He completed 17 of 18 passes into what I would call the flat area. He completed all 14 passes to the left flat. Essentially, he attempted 14 passes in that direction, and I just it was the NGS chart that I circled that, and it's like between 10 yards, and outside the hashes to the left. Like, he just hit that time and time again in this game, and that's really an exchange between the corner and the linebacker that needs to be shored up. Cameron Dantzler and Jordan Hicks, I think, primarily in this case. Or, just players leaking out late is also a scenario that you end up getting there, but him being able to get to those checkdowns. And I agree with you that I think the philosophy of having that too high coverage shell is generally pretty good. You don't want to get beat over top. And what you want to do is you want to force the opposing offense to take long drives down the field where they're more likely to make a mistake the more plays they have in a drive, right? It's really difficult to sustain 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-yard drives time after time after time, and the Vikings are trying to force that from the opposing offense. We saw against the Packers, they had a couple of really long drives, and they only ended up scoring on one of them because we were able to eventually win and shut them down. The problem in this game is the Vikings defense wasn't able to get that win at any point on those drives, at least in the first half, right? And I think the biggest problem that one of the big contributors to that was our defensive line did not win in the pass rush game against the Eagles offensive line. Now, the Eagles offensive line is fantastic. It's probably the best offensive line in the NFL, especially when it comes to pass protection. But, that's something that you if you're not going to win in the trenches, and I don't think the Vikings won in the trenches on either side of the ball in this game, you're not going to win football games.
yeah, and that's a good. I'm trying to look up how fast was Hurts' time to release, because I feel like he got rid of the ball pretty quickly. Like I remember, I think Hunter had some pretty impressive pass rushes.
Yeah, there
But
a couple. Hunter had a couple good snaps, and Wanham obviously got the sack where I thought he had a good rush on that snap, but Hunter forced the pressure into him. But I don't think the interior guys did too much in terms of pushing the pocket. And generally on third downs, like when Hurts was bailing the pocket and that sort of thing, he was pretty clean and did a good job of extending plays and getting the conversions, I would say.
yeah, so Hurts wound up actually with a 3-second time to throw, but that's probably extended by the times he was rolling out of the pocket or escaping from pressure too. I think he did a good job playing in rhythm when he was able to and getting rid of the ball
Yep.
before pressure got home. So, but you're right. I mean, pass rush needs to do better too. I will say if there's a silver lining to put on some of the performances, I think as much as the Eagles attacked them in the flats, I think the Vikings did a generally good job tackling, like rallying to the flat and tackling there. Some exceptions, but for the most part, I feel like if the philosophy is if you want to dink and we're not going to give up explosives, and if you want to try and dink and dunk us down the field, I think I have some confidence that that's going to be really hard to do. Not everybody's going to be as good as Jalen Hurts was this game. It's really on the Tom Brady offenses that have perfected the art of making zero mistakes on a 13 play dink and dunk drive, because a lot of things can go wrong. I mean, it takes just one batted pass or one, tackle at the line of scrimmage or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're behind the chains and you're playing catch up. So, yeah, the Eagles were managed to stay ahead of the chains. And one thing I do want to say is, although the amount of yards we gave up on the ground ended up looking bad because of some explosive rushes, including in the 2-minute drill where they had like a draw play that we
Yeah.
were completely not prepared for. I thought the run defense was very stout, and they were going in very light boxes. I was kind of
Absolutely.
very interested. I was very interested to see how they would fit the run against Hurts because anytime you have a dual threat quarterback, you're basically -1 in the run game already. And so anytime you do your fits, the idea is if you're doing a single gap run fit, use if there are if there are 5 offensive linemen and a tight end, an inline tight end, that's 7 gaps. So you need to have 7 players in the box to account for those gaps. If you only have 6 players, you're out gapped. But what the Vikings did is they only had 6 players against six offensive blockers, and Jalen Hurts. So they were playing -1 player. They were playing minus a player and the
Mhm.
and the being outgapped, and they were still really able to stuff a lot of the run game. And the Eagles were throwing a lot of things at them, and I thought Kelsey was really impressive on some of his pulls and stuff. But I was impressed by everybody. I mean, the starters: Dalvin Tomlinson, always Harrison Phillips. Hunter, despite, if you don't blame him for that read option, I think Hunter did a really good job. And Patrick Jones had some really impressive. He had that really impressive being able to chase down. I think it was a wide zone weak call that he chased down from the backside. So that much I think is really impressive, and it's also encouraging, I think, because most teams that we play are not going to have a dynamic dual threat quarterback like Jalen Hurts. So if they can fit the run this way, with light boxes for the rest of the year, and this is right now, I think the Vikings have matched up the lightest boxes against the run in the NFL. That's an encouraging thing because it means that they're going to be able to have numbers advantages in the passing game all year long. So that much I thought was impressive. Honestly, I was expecting us to get gashed a lot worse by Hurts and the running backs in the running game. And while there were some explosives that kind of skewed the stats, ultimately I thought it was an impressive job by the run defense, considering how they chose to basically fight it single-handedly and still come away not looking terrible.
Yeah, I thought based on what we saw, like based on the way they called it, the run defense was fantastic. The Eagles did get a couple chunk plays, like that first run of the game. I think if the safeties are coming down and they're facing the running backs, it's at 7 yards and they're not making a tackle. That's a big problem. Cam Bynum, I think, missed a tackle like the first play of the game, and then the next play of the game, the Eagles ran the same play with Kelsey pulling, just flipped, and Eric Kendricks and Dalvin Tomlinson both stood up their blocks, stopped the play for like a 2 yard gain. I thought it was really impressive showing. And, outside of a couple Jalen Hurts explosives later in the game, the biggest runs for the Eagles came on draw plays in that 2 minute drill where they saw we had, I think it was Blacklock and James Lynch in the game. And the Eagles were just like, all right, we can run the ball on these guys, right? So maybe rotate out the starting defensive tackles a little bit less. I know that's hard for wear and tear over the course of the season and load management and that sort of thing. But I don't think teams are going to be able to run really successfully on our defensive tackles. Like the yards per carry number might not look too great from the Vikings defense just because we are playing with that man down in the box, but I think on a down to down basis, we're going to be relatively successful stopping the run because of how high of a level that Phillips and Tomlinson are playing in the middle. Like it is true, like I mean, they're almost two, like, we're playing gap and a half, quote unquote, defense. It's almost like they're two gapping because they're just taking up so much space. It's been really impressive. But I think that'll pretty much wrap us up on the defensive side of things. We've covered we've kind of gone, head to toe on the defense. Why don't we flip it over to the offense? And I think this was a story, it was a story of two halves because I didn't think the Vikings offense, um, I didn't think Kirk looked bad in the first half. I thought Kirk looked pretty good in the first half, despite the Vikings offense not being able to stay on the field. I think we only had 4 drives, and 3 of those drives were 3 and outs. But we just failed on third down. We just didn't win on third down on those plays, and the other one was obviously the touchdown drive. And then in the second half, it got away from Kirk, and he kind of imploded a little bit. So why don't you kind of go over what you thought of the offense, Nick?
Yeah, it was interesting. Obviously, they really struggled to get anything going on the first 2 drives, which kind of caused the game plan to get away from them. They will go 3 and out on the first 2 drives. It starts with a negative run with Dalvin Cook, and so then they're just trying to get yards back, and then they had back-to-back third downs where they went to Jefferson on the first one on a curl route. Darius Slay gets away with grabbing Jefferson's hand. Kevin O'Connell actually came out, I think, yesterday and said, like, yes, the NFL told us they should have called that for pass interference, but, Slay got away with it. And Jefferson, you can still catch the ball even if you're one-handed, and Jefferson wasn't able to corral it with one
Yeah,
hand.
I
So,
don't feel too
um,
bad about them not calling that. Like, that's a pretty ticky-tack call if they end up throwing the flag on that to me.
Well, I mean, he grabbed his hand. He like yanked his hand
Yeah.
down, so he wasn't able to use his hand at the catch point, which players do that and they get away with it, and it's not unusual for them to get away with that too. And it's not like it was like bowling him over or anything. It was like a slight grab, and then he used his other hand to try and get into the catch point. Slay, honestly, pass interference aside, played it really well. He recognized the curl right away, drove on it right away, and used his length to get into the pass the catch point. So Slay played very well. And the second time, they had a little uh, stick route or in route by Irv Smith, and he got matched up against TJ Edwards, who is not a coverage linebacker, and Smith, for whatever reason, wasn't able to break away. Usually I think it was a man coverage look, and that's what you want. Is you want like Irv Smith, your star
Yep.
receiving tight end, who's functionally a wide receiver in a lot of ways, he can just also block too. But he's a good route runner, or at least he was last time we saw him healthy. And you want him matched up against somebody like TJ Edwards, but Edwards was able to cover him and was able to play him, I guess, kind of at the sticks and interrupt the route path and interrupt
Hmm.
the break. And the Irv wasn't able to come down with that pass. So you go back to back, 3 and outs. And from there, it's kind of like, okay, well, at this point, we're down 2 scores. It's 14-0, and we got the ball back, and we don't have a first down yet. So it's still the first quarter. So at that point, it looks like they scrap the plan. They go to this shotgun-based offense, and I like the play calling from that point. And maybe I assume that Jalen Reagor end around the jet sweep to Jalen Reagor, maybe that was part of the script for the game. But for the most part, they switched to empty. They switched to shotgun. They start giving Jefferson some easy choice routes out of the shotgun. A lot of stuff like that, which generates a lot easier yardage. Even if you're not getting necessarily easy matchups in the slot, if you go just do the Jefferson LSU offense and let
Yep.
them run choice routes out of the slot all day, it's easy money. And I think that was actually a really good adjustment to start doing some of that, moving the ball down the field, and they were able to. And then they were able to punch it in with another. It was just like last week. It was another play action run in the low red zone where somebody in the flat forgot to cover their man coming across the formation.
Yep.
Irv Smith was able to get in for a touchdown. So that was a good drive. And then from there, they go 3 and out, and they go 3 and out again. So it was offensively, they kind of had a plan, but the Eagles, one was part of it was Slay was playing very well. The Eagles had a very good game plan where they were playing a lot of man coverage, and the Vikings surprisingly were not winning their matchups. Usually, I would say, yeah, please play man coverage
Yeah.
against Justin and play man coverage against Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne and Herb Smith. But Eagles were able to put up the clamps, and they mixed coverage a good amount. They did do true double coverage on Justin Jefferson. Like one man, like one double Justin Jefferson was probably like 10%, 20% of their play calls. And on plays where they weren't doubling him, they had like Zeus or similar type zone kinds of. It's not quite a true bracket, but it's zone coverage's formulation of double teaming Justin Jefferson. So that's part of the reason you saw Jefferson's performance dip. And then yeah, they weren't able to sort of pass protection broke down on some plays, and Cousins wasn't able. So that was kind of the first half. I agree with you. In the second half, it
Yeah.
seemed
So
like Cousins was suddenly
So
trying to do
back
way
to the
too much.
first half on my end a little bit. There were a couple things. That second Irv third down, I think that we missed. The first one was against TJ Edwards. I believe the second one was against James Bradbury, where the Eagles sent a blitz, and I think after the blitz distribution, James Bradbury ended up on Irv Smith, and it was man coverage once again. Kirk goes to that, and I don't agree with that decision that he made there. I thought Thielen on a dig was open behind it. He was matched up against Avonte Maddox. I think he should have gone to Thielen there. And I think it was just a generally rough half in the first half for Irv Smith. I thought he redeemed himself actually in the second half. He made a really nice catch in tight coverage. He made a really nice play to get a first down after the catch when he got the ball in the flat. So I thought there were some positives,
You guys
and
missed.
I was happy to see that for Irv because it was a rough first half from him, and we are going to need him moving forward. I mean, Johnny Munt can make a couple of catches and do something here and there, but ultimately he's a blocker, right? He's not going to be a dynamic receiving threat. He's going to be a dump off option in the passing game for you. So Irv gives you a bit more of that dynamism there. The other thing I want to talk about is um, I do think there were a couple opportunities for us to hit, and there was one in the second half, there was one in the first half for Kirk Cousins to step up and hit a backside dig that were open. You highlighted one today where he checked down to Dalvin Cook, which was a fine decision, but there's a backside dig coming open on the backside, and I know
Did you?
I
I was
saw the
going to say
response.
I got corrected. Kyle Sloter came in and told me actually it was actually pretty good to know. He said the progression was 1 to 2 is so it's like a high-low concept, like a smash concept where Jefferson's running a deep kind of corner, and then Dalvin Cook is releasing into the flat after I think maybe
Yeah.
delayed release into the flat. So it's a high-low stressor, and it was up against cover two coverage, and so the corner actually followed Jefferson on the corner route, so that left Dalvin Cook wide open underneath. And I looked at it and said, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't mind getting Cook the ball in space with that much green grass ahead of him, but also it was a cover two middle of the field open look, and KJ Osborne was coming open on a backside dig, and I thought that looked really appetizing too. Slaughter came out, and I guess Slaughter actually knows the play call and said, well, no, the progression is corner route to Jefferson to Dalvin Cook, and then if Dalvin Cook is uncovered, do you go to Osborne on the backside, which I
See,
think makes sense because it's a
I
high-low concept. So if the top one's covered, the underneath one should give you plenty of space. So
yeah,
I guess I can't harp on Kirk too much for
I
that.
agree that the letter of the law says it's a high-low concept and you should go to number two first. But I think Matt Stafford throws the dig on that play. Like, if I had to bet, I bet you Matthew Stafford throws a dig on that play,
Hey
right?
man, if Kyle Floater won't break the rules for the backside dig, then I'm okay with Kirk not breaking the rules. You know.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Kyle Sloter, I think, didn't really break many rules. I think he just threw to the guy who was open every time in the Vikings preseason. The problem was,
Yeah, I guess Floater wasn't so much of a rule breaker so much as like just improv the whole show.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, so I thought there were some opportunities for Kirk to do it, but also our guys weren't getting open, so it is a little bit difficult there. And I thought the Eagles had a very good game plan to counter what Kevin O'Connell was doing on offense. I just don't think we executed play calling as well as we could have on offense to get our guys open, or the Eagles kind of guessed right and had us figured out a little bit in that instance. And if we flip it over to the second half, right, the Vikings start to drive down the field on the very first drive, and then we get into the red zone, and there's a big play where Kirk Cousins, ends up throwing a pick because Justin Jefferson kind of came off the route. And Jefferson came out after the game. Troy Aikman honestly did a really, really good job of diagnosing it live on the coverage that Jefferson should have flattened out and come across on the dig route. I think that based on Darius Slay's leverage, I don't love the decision to throw because Darius Slay played this really well. Granted, we had a big play last week where Justin Jefferson was able to run off Darnell Savage in basically in a very similar route, right? Where he was able to get Darnell Savage's hips turned and cut across him across the field. And I think that was the 66-yard game, if I'm not mistaken, that he had last week. So Darius Slay just played this route better. He played the route really well. Kirk throws it. Justin Jefferson kind of falls off the route, and it looks like he's nowhere near there. But I think ultimately he was supposed to run the dig and come across the field. And if you look at that play, really nothing else on the concept was open. Maybe Kirk could have checked the ball down, but I think based on just what I want him to have in terms of trust of Justin Jefferson, I don't hate Kirk throwing that ball. I think it's more on Jefferson and losing the route.
Yeah, I mean, depends on when you look at when Kirk released it, but Jefferson has to like the one thing he can't do is improv and just go behind
Yep.
Slay because that gives Slay, as Aiken pointed out, just easy. The ball is thrown to Slay at that point. So, and cousin can't know that oh, I'm going to go over the top and you should loft it over me and into the back of the end zone or whatever. At the very worst, if he tries to actually get past Slay and establish leverage on the inside of Slay. The best thing he can do is you won't get a completion, but at the very least, Jefferson will be able to prevent the interception and get in the way. But I do think Jefferson should have been able to sort of establish leverage. It would have been tough, and it would have been a contested catch. But I think I would certainly take that over Jefferson just sort of ceding ground to Slay and giving up the interception. So there was that one, and then things kind of started to unravel from there. We had 3 interceptions, so there was another one.
Should have
Hard
been
to
like
keep track of.
6.
there were so many interceptable passes. There was the back-to-back at the very end of the game where they were in the red zone and they were running kind of like a corner, a high-low corner route and flat route in the end zone, and or like a circus route where it's an inside release and then corner of the end zone. So Jefferson wins and gets open, and Eagles were running cover zero, which they were actually doing a lot of. Jonathan Gannon, their defensive coordinator, not a blitz heavy guy, but I think they started to see that like Vikings weren't ready for the blitz, and Kirk was a little rattled, so they started to throw a lot of cover zero, which is you don't see that a lot because it's you know it's very easy to get gashed for like a 75-yard touchdown on cover zero. And we've seen actually the Vikings, Kyler Murray did that to the Vikings before. So um, it's a risky play call to do. But Kirk Cousins not necessarily the most arm talent in the world throwing off his back foot. And that's what he tries to do is I think he correctly tries to throw the ball up to Justin Jefferson in the back corner of the end zone. Because Jefferson catches Slay flat-footed and Jefferson's able to peel off and get like basically I won't say an acre of space, but for what you're usually looking at in the end zone, where you're working with so much less vertical space to actually cover, I think Jefferson was very open, and Cousins just isn't able to put enough velocity on the ball, and it's a duck. And the first time Slade drops it, and the second time Slade catches it. They do it on back-to-back plays to get the exact same look at the exact same defensive. It's cover zero, and Cousins makes the exact same mistake twice in a row. So that's a backbreaker. I don't know if you want to cover anything else in the second half.
Actually, that kind of brings up something I want to talk about, which and this is referencing an article that came out, I don't know, a month ago before the season that Stephen Ruiz at the Ringer wrote. And one of the things I thought was interesting was how he rated Kirk's arm talent, which was not very highly. And I honestly think that kind of showed up in this game. There were a number of plays, and that first Jefferson third down where Slay gets the pass breakup when it maybe should have been pass interference. I think Kirk threw the ball a beat late there to hit it, and people with absolute rocket arms might be able to fit that in there past the corner. I thought those two plays at the end of the game where Kirk, that's a full body throw, right? Like that's only upper body strength that he's using to throw that ball because he's falling backwards. He doesn't have the ability to step into it, and he wasn't able to get either to the high back pylon, right? They would have died like halfway in the end zone, even if nobody was there to catch him. So he just didn't get the distance he needed on those throws. The second interception to Thielen was, it was a cover 2 look, and it was actually another sail concept, but I think it was more working the high-low on what was a smash concept, where Justin Jefferson was kind of short. And I honestly, I have a gripe with the play design here because I thought Justin Jefferson was too deep. It was like he was like 8 yards deep, and then Thielen was only 3 or 4 yards behind him. So the corner who was guarding Justin Jefferson was able to sink and get underneath the pass and make a nice leaping catch. But it's the turkey hole or whatever that John Gruden used to talk about, right? Where you need a really good arm to be able to fit those throws in there. And then the two Adam Thielen catches, they ended up catches in when we were driving down the field in the third or fourth quarter. He just barely, the ball just barely got past the corner. And honestly, in both instances, I didn't watch it up close again on the All-22, but I think the corner whiffed on hitting the ball, and it got into Thielen's hands when the corner had a chance to make a play on those passes. So the velocity is a little bit of a question for me with Kirk Cousins at this point, to be honest with you.
I think, it's funny because on the one hand, I could do a victory lap here because I think I remember when those rankings came out, I agreed with Steven on the ranking Cousins' arms talent not very high, and I think I had a lot of Vikings fans come after me and say like, no, look at all these throws where he chucks it up 65 yards deep on a moon ball, and I was like, yeah, but compared to like Matt Stafford or Kyler Murray or Derek Carr,
okay, hold on, I gotta stop you for a second. If you are listening to this podcast and you think that somebody throwing the ball 65 yards is an indication of arm strength, you haven't been listening to us talking, I don't think. That's not what arm strength is. Almost every quarterback in the NFL can get that distance on the ball. It's about the trajectory of the ball as they're throwing it. The arc of the pass is what tells you what arm strength actually is on a quarterback. Like, you can see Justin Herbert throw those deep balls and the ball doesn't leave the screen. That's because he has an absolute bazooka for an arm. Josh Allen's the same way. Like, it's the trajectory of the pass and the time that it's able to get there that matters. if Kirk's not on time on out routes, on timing routes to the sideline, like it's trouble. If Josh Allen isn't on time, if he's a beat late, he can rocket that ball in there. That's the difference in that level of arm strength.
Yeah, and I guess the distinction I would make with Cousins is if you give him a clean pocket and he can set things up right and use the entirety of his lower body and torque it, I do think he has a very solid arm. Like there was
Yep.
that throw to, I think it was a low throw to KJ Osborne on kind of a glance route, as if I'm remembering it right, and that was rifled in there like it was a bullet that came in right in there, and that was a good throw. That was a hard, strong throw that there are, Matt Ryan can't make a throw like that, and there are a number of starting quarterbacks. Mac Jones can't make that kind of throw as much. So Cousins is when he's able to have a clean platform and sort of use his pristine mechanics. It's almost like Tom Brady. Like, does he have an incredible arm? No. Um, does HGH, give him a little bit of a boost? Probably. We don't know, but probably. But pristine mechanics gives him incredible arm strength when he is given a clean pocket. But if he's throwing it off his back foot, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not generating, 60-mile-per-hour passes at the flick of a wrist. So that's kind of the distinction I make. And I think this game was a good showcase of Kirk's strengths and limitations, because we did see him make some, there were a lot of actually really impressive throws with anticipation, throws over a trailing defender on like a post route underneath, throws to the cover two hole that you were talking about. Those, some very accurate, well placed throws, and then there were plays where he just chucks it up and didn't see the underneath defender, or thought he could get away with it with the underneath defender, and he gets picked and just thrown to Darius Slay over and over and over again. So.
Yep.
And you saw like the criticisms of Kirk Cousins, which actually I pushed back on a lot, because this was the criticism of Kirk coming out of Washington. It was that he had zero pocket presence. He would get rattled. He wouldn't play well under pressure. When the lights were brightest, he wasn't able to perform. And I feel like Cousins actually got rid of a lot of those perceptions after showing actually, I think, very good pocket presence most of his time in Minnesota, and being able to play well under pressure, including in the Superdome against a 13-3 Saints team. But this game, he was rattled. I mean, he would get to the top of his drop and he would start hitching over and over like he's a rookie quarterback.
Yep.
So it was part of that was good play design and good blitzing from Jonathan Gannon and mixing things up and making Kirk, I think, hesitate on himself. And part of it was also Kirk pushing himself to be aggressive because he was trying to accomplish a comeback, and so he was trying to be more aggressive than he normally would be. But I think those combinations then probably, yeah, being at Monday Night Football, playing at nighttime rather than when he's normally used to at 1 p.m., playing on prime time, playing out of schedule in a open air stadium in a hostile environment. I think all that probably added up and made him play, crack a little bit under the pressure. So that much is concerning. I think it's actually, in a lot of ways, it was kind of a narrative redefining game for Cousins, because I think if at any point Cousins goes on a Kirktober run and he just crushes people and puts up like 30 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in a matter of weeks, people are still going to come back and point at this game and say,
Yep.
like, yeah, well, Monday Night Football, when the lights were brightest, he cracked under pressure. And you know what? That's true. It's
and
true.
and we don't have a
So
whole lot of those opportunities coming up down the pipe to play in prime time on national TV. I think I don't think a lot of our games are going to be nationally broadcast, so might set the tone for Kirk this season, even if he goes on to have a monster year. One other thing I want to get to before we get onto the Lions game here is I do think you talked about Kirk. We talked about how Kirk throwing off platform is not great, right? When he doesn't have that solid base and isn't able to step in it. And I thought he was forced to be off platform a lot in this game. I think even when they weren't, just getting free rushers on blitzes, which was definitely an issue, and they were sending one more man than we could block, right? But there were instances still where two guys were coming three. I thought the protection calls, could use some work. But on top of that, I didn't think the pass protection was very good at all from basically across the line. Like, honestly, and this is a question for you, like, who do you think our best pass blocker is? Because I have an idea and it's going to be very surprising to people, I think.
in general, it's O'Neal, but last
No,
week,
last night, yeah, or on Monday.
uh, Maybe O'Neal, but I think you're going to say Garrett Bradbury, and I think there's a good argument
I think it
for
was
it.
Garrett Bradbury. Like O'Neal was getting compressed back. He was getting bull rush back. I think he lost around the edge even a couple times, which is very rare for him. Christian Darrisaw was doing the same. Ezra Cleveland had a terrible game. Ezra
Yeah.
Cleveland was really bad in pass protection in particular. There was one play where Javon Hargrave just absolutely ate his lunch. Ed Ingram did not have a good game. I mean, I have hope for Ed Ingram getting better, but I don't think he's, you know, uh,
It wasn't as bad,
yeah,
but it was not good. So.
yeah, I don't think he's a quality starting lineman at this point. I think he'll grow into that role as we get on. But yeah, I thought
And
everybody
then
was bad.
meanwhile, you had Garrett Bradbury stonewalling Jordan Davis in a one-on-one like bull rush.
Yeah, all
So
of his
go
problems are
figure.
solved, guys. All of his problems are solved. He'll have no more problems against bull rushes. He did it against the most monstrous player in the league. Yeah.
So yeah, of all the random things to happen in this game. Couple other final notes for me on the offense before we dive into Lions. We criticized Kirk a lot, but I think this was a total failure. I think this we talked about the receivers. Receivers didn't get open. They didn't catch the ball either. I mean, obviously there was the Irv Smith drop, but I think a lot of people came away with bad drops. I
I counted four
count.
drops. It was
Yeah,
Irv, it was Munt, and it was both of the running backs. So none of the wide
yeah.
receivers had a drop, but they weren't getting targeted all that much outside of Jefferson, and that didn't go well either.
Screen game is a disaster, and part of that is guys not releasing fast enough, and part of that is defensive linemen preventing them from releasing upfield fast enough. But it guys were not. It looked like that we hadn't drilled some of these screens that we were calling. I think Kevin O'Connell took a lot of the blame for this game, and I think sometimes guys do that to be a good guy and take. But I think in this instance, yeah, like. I kind of expected a lot more from O'Connell. I knew he would kind of came out and they got punched in the mouth and they had to like recalibrate everything on the fly. But we knew Jefferson was going to see double teams. We did not see the same kind of things they did like the Packers. The Packers tried to double team Jefferson too, and they were really smart and had a purposeful plan for how they would use motion and how they would use alignment formation to find ways to get Jefferson the ball anyway. And we saw a lot less of that. And granted, you can't do that as much when you're down 14 points after four drives or what after two drives. And you have to, play catch up and you have to play shotgun and you have to abandon the run action to an extent. And you can't do under center play action heavy type stuff, at least not as much. Or if you do, linebackers aren't going to bite on it as much. So that's part of why. But also, I think O'Connell probably could have done a little bit more to scheme things up for the offense. And yeah, like it offensively, nothing was good. The receivers, the protection, the quarterbacking, the scheming. So and Dalvin Cook, for the matter, we didn't talk at all about the running game, but Dalvin Cook was not great in the running game either. So
No,
other
Dalvin
than
Cook
that,
in the
okay.
first half in particular looked very poor. Like he didn't look like the same Dalvin Cook we're used to seeing. Obviously, he had a couple drops. He did have one nice run in the second half. He had a couple nice plays in the second half, so maybe he picked it up. Maybe everybody was just having a down game. But I do agree with you that the Vikings, off script, off schedule, did not look good in this game, and that's a concern moving forward. That's something we need to see them get better at. And one final note there on the offense is we were 4 for 12 on third down conversions in this game. We were 4 for 13 last week against the Packers. It's been an issue for us only converting, a third of our third downs, which is not a very good rate at all. So that'll be something to watch moving forward when this offense gets off script. Can we get back on script? It just hasn't been that way, and we didn't need to do it against the Packers, so I think that kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. It wasn't the talking point because, in general, the team looked really good. Obviously, we were so excited about how Justin Jefferson did in that game and how the defense performed, but there were, I think, if you look back at it through the lens of the Eagles games, there were a little bit of concerning signs that I think led to this, which might bring us to roll it forward into the Lions game, right? So are we going to see the same issues we saw against the Eagles pop up against the Lions? Or are we going to turn it around, kind of get back to that game against the Packers that we had and just go back and dominate the Lions? Or is it going to be somewhere in between? That's usually where the truth lies, right? So why don't we start with the Lions offense? right? The Lions offense has been dominant through 2 games. Obviously, they scored 30 something points against the Eagles. They put up another 30 something points against the Washington Commanders last week. And, we had a lot of hope going into the Eagles game just because of the performance that the Lions were able to put up against them. Their run game has been dominant. DeAndre Swift, even though he's battling injury, he was partly injured last week as well, has looked absolutely incredible. Amon-Ra St. Brown on the offensive side has also continued his torrid pace that he started last year. I think he has 8 catches and a touchdown in like 6 out of his last 8 games or something like that. The other stat I want to bring up that I heard today is that the Lions are averaging over 4 yards before contact in the rush game. So their offensive line is playing really well just in terms of creating holes. And there were a couple good articles about the variety of the Lions run game. So why don't you talk a little bit about the Lions offense here, Nick?
Yeah, I think it's one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Granted, I think they're down a guard and they might be down Ragnow as well. So we might not get them at their. Jonah Jackson, I think, is questionable, and I think Ragnow is also questionable or will be. They're both dealing with injuries. I think they're both limited participants, so they'll probably play, but it's a very, very talented offensive line. It's generally a pretty young offensive line, too. So it's an ascending unit, and they are a really well coached offense. And I feel like they were last year, and that goes on both sides of the ball. But I think in the offense specifically, I think they do a really good job designing a run game to attack the points where you're weak. And I think um, they're a very multiple type of run game, which makes it very hard to defend against. Like if you're only a wide zone team, you can it's easy to do like 5-1 runs front, 6-1 fronts, play bear, play more odd fronts, muck up those gaps, make it harder for the guys to like scoop or climb to the second level. But when you can do everything, when you can do wide zone, but you can also pin and pull, and you can also do duo really well, and you can also move bodies, and you can run counter, and you trap. If there are guys running upfield, you run trap, and if the guys are playing off, you smash them in the face with duo or whatever. Like they can kind of do it all, and because they have such a good running game with lots of talent in the running game, they're able to move bodies down the field. And usually we don't think of running games as difference makers, but when it's this good, we've seen games like the Saints 2 years ago when if you have no answer for a running game, you can get in trouble. And I think that's kind of what happened with the Eagles as well, as they kind of got caught off guard by how good of a rushing unit
Mm-hmm.
this is and how many different ways that the Lions have to beat you. And they're very good at knowing which specific kinds of runs to run against you to beat you. So the pin pull sweeps that the Packers gashed us with for like 4 or 5 explosives in week one. I think we'll probably see more of that. The Lions probably can't borrow what Jalen Hurts can do as in the read option game with Jared Goff, but
You don't think
there's a
Jared
lot of.
Goff is out there running read option?
Well, I don't know. I mean, when Kirk Cousins came in for RG3, they kept a lot of those read option things, and if Kirk can do it, Jared Goff can probably do it too. So at least you know what? Actually, Kyle Shanahan used it a lot in like the low red zone, and because nobody ever accounted Kirk as a rusher, and that's how like Kirk. It's funny you look back at like those years and like total rushing touchdowns. It's like all the running backs, Cam Newton. And then like Kirk Cousins with like 5 touchdowns a year. It's like, when that's why, because it was the RG3 playbook. But yeah, I mean, there it's just that's going to be a bear to deal with, and I feel confident that the Vikings have good personnel as well to match up with the Lions, but it's probably still advantage Lions just because of how many talented bodies they have and how well coached they
I
are.
will say the big thing that's a concern for me there is, like you mentioned, with the pin and pull runs, with those runs that are hitting outside, and I would say like the C and D gap, right? Between the tackle and the tight end maybe outside but inside the corner. Uh you have a you just have a situation where our big defensive tackles aren't able to make an impact on those plays. They're getting washed down by people coming down at them. So you have it running against maybe Jordan Hicks, who's played pretty well in run defense, but you have it running against later bodies, and you've got offensive linemen on those later bodies. So it really is a question there.
The passing game, I think, is a complete opposite. Obviously, they have good protection from that great offensive line, but Jared Goff is Jared Goff, and Vikings fans know from that Rams game way back when that he's capable of high level play. So he's not nobody, but he's also not a good quarterback. I mean, he's a good quarterback when everything is perfect, but like Kirk Cousins or Jimmy Garoppolo or any of those like sort of mid-tier quarterbacks, and I think Goff is really a step below a lot of those guys. Things are usually not exactly how you draw them up. And as much of an explosion Amon-Ra St. Brown has had, I still don't put a lot of stock into these receivers. I think TJ Hawkinson, I think, is a solid Y tight
Yep.
end. But like Josh Reynolds, DJ Chark, I do not think these guys are going to be the worst guys to cover. If there were ever a game to like modify the too high shell and spinning down at the snap or whatever to play a little bit more cover one, a little bit more press man coverage, I would think it might be this one because you probably want the extra gap in the run game. You probably want a little bit more help, and you probably are a little bit less worried about Goff challenging you downfield. And also Goff is the kind of guy who you want to get pressure on him because that's when things fall apart for him. But I think they have their defensive philosophy, and they're not going to
Yeah.
they're not going to bend from that too
Yeah,
much.
I think
So
if the Eagles game taught us anything, it's that they're not bending from that defensive philosophy, right? They're gonna keep with that basically, the entire season. I don't think we can expect to see anything different from them. I will say, the Lions receivers, I don't love them on the whole. I am pretty impressed with what Amon-Ra St. Brown has been doing, and it does concern me a little bit that he's kind of that slot underneath type. That's where we've been gashed so far, right? That's where teams have hit us consistently, and then he's really good at generating yards after catch. Like, he's a really strong player running after the catch. So that is a bit of a concern in this game for me. I think we're going to struggle to contain the Lions offense a little bit. But on the flip side, I think the Lions are very much going to struggle to contain our offense. They have been atrocious so far. They've let up a ton of points to both the Commanders, who I don't think are a very good team, and although they have an explosive offense, they've got like pretty good wide receiver weapons, and the Eagles, who we just faced, right? But the Vikings, in terms of the run game, I think will be able to gain ground in the run game, but I think in particular we'll be able to gain things in the passing game where the Lions, we talked about it, like their defensive line has some interesting pieces with Aiden Hutchinson. Charles Harris actually was pretty good last year as well, in the pass rush game, but their secondary is pretty barren, I think. I don't think Amari or Awarie is really a quality starting corner in the NFL. Jeff Okudah has looked okay through a couple games, but their linebacker core I don't love. Their safeties I don't love. I think we'll be able to kind of gash them in the passing game as they've been the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think they are a well-coached defense. And remember, we almost hired their defensive coordinator, Aaron
Yeah.
Glenn, before we decided to actually settle with Ed
It was
Donatell.
actually the defensive backs coach, Aubrey Pleasant, but yes.
Oh yeah, that's right, Aubrey Plaza. But so it's a well-coached defense, but they are just relatively very talent poor. I think this is one of the least talented defenses in the NFL right now, and they just that can change. If like Okuda has a breakout season after 2 years of being banged up, if Aiden Hutchinson, he had 3 cleanup sacks and lots of pressures. Granted, a lot of them were like cleanup; they weren't high quality. And he also is. I think he might be out. I don't think has practiced yet this week because he injured his thigh. I want to say,
Sure.
but. Um, they have like kind of a lot of just a guys like Romeo Aguirre or Michael Brockers or Shelby Harris, but Tracy Walker, like these are NFL players, but there's nobody in there that's like a Daniil Hunter or a TJ Watt or a Jalen Ramsey, or there aren't any difference makers, I think, on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
So and Mike Hughes is their slot right now, so old friend there. So there are ways to attack it in a lot of different ways. They will defensively. They like Aaron Glenn likes to throw more man coverage at you. He likes to do cover one. He likes to blitz you. So we'll probably see a lot of that based on the fact that like Gannon was a little more blitz happy, and if I don't know if we'll necessarily see cover zero early on because it's risky, but we might see it in the red zone a lot when the risk reward is a lot higher, is a lot better for the defense, or we might see it in certain situations on third downs, or if it's not cover zero, maybe we'll see cover one with 5 men coming, and that'll isolate guys against Garrett Bradbury or maybe it only takes one guy to mess up. So I do think. Um, they're going to put their guys in the best place to succeed. I'm just not sure right now, looking at it, that I think the Vikings are clearly our offense is more talented than their defense. So All you put all that combined, I think the Vikings should be favored to win this one. It is at home. Right now, they're favored by about a touchdown. That sounds about right considering they're playing at US Bank to me. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if if the Lions are a scrappy team and it'll probably be a close game, but it also wouldn't surprise me if this winds up being Vikings win by multiple scores. So I
Yeah.
just think, and that's I have a lot of respect for the coaching staff. I just think Vikings have a lot more talent on their roster. Lions are only just starting to stack talent on that roster.
Yeah, so if I were to give a score prediction right now, I do think the Vikings win. I think they're a more talented team, as we kind of talked about. I don't dislike the direction the Lions are going in. I think they've got a lot of interesting pieces, and I think they'll be very competitive moving forward, but I just don't think they have everything, right? This is a team that went, what, 3-13-1 last year or something like that. They just don't have the basis of talent, and they're building that through the draft and developing players, I think, but I don't think they're there this year, even if they are 1-1 and hung with the Eagles pretty well. I wouldn't even say they hung with the Eagles. They almost came back against the Eagles. They were getting blown out for quite a time in that game there. So I don't think they're quite on that level. Uh, so for me, if I'm going with a score prediction, I'll go 27-20 Vikings. I don't know what the total line is, but I know the line's like 6 points. So that's right around that 6 point line. I don't know what the over/under total is, but it's probably somewhere close if it's not in the high 40s, if it's not in the 50s. So 27-20 Vikings. We kind of get a redemption win here, and we're 2-0 in the division, which will be critical come playoff time, I think. So I think that's nice. Nick, what's your score prediction?
Yeah, I'd do pretty similar, probably like 30-20. I think I wouldn't be surprised if the under ends up cashing here because I feel like the Lions are going to be able to sustain drives. And part of the thing about having such a
Yep.
talented run game and offensive line is those third and short situations. I think they're favored to continue drives moving. I just don't think they're going to generate many explosives at all. I don't think they're going to. I don't think Jared Goff is going to go off. So it's mostly going to be a matter of them trying to just eke out, like continuing to get just barely enough for a first down over and over and over again. And I think that's a situation where the Vikings are very comfortable if that's, what it ends up playing out as. So, and I do think the Vikings rebound. I think they come out and they won't be like in the Eagles, like punched in the mouth immediately down 14-0, trying to scramble together a new game plan. So I think fundamentally, I think this team is closer to what we saw in week one than what we saw in week two. And I think the personnel we have, Justin Jefferson and the offensive weapons, Dalvin Cook in the run game, and then the pass rush with Hunter and Zadarius Smith up front. I think the Vikings should be favored at home, and they are. And I will continue. I will side with Vegas right here. And yeah, I think the Vikings win this one, and hopefully they do because that would be much needed after getting beaten down by the Eagles. We can wash the taste of that out of our mouths.
Yeah. So those are our score predictions for the game. Uh, let's flip it over to the segment everybody loves. You guys probably don't want to hear about our fantasy teams, but I need to talk about mine this week. So we're gonna roll into 15 seconds of fantasy here, and I'm gonna let Nick. I'm gonna let you start it off. You got about 7 seconds.
Diggs and Tyreek combined for 70 points. I went up against the hardest person in our league, and I won, and I am now number one in points scored. So I'm rolling, baby.
And our co-host Greg isn't here because he lost to me this week. I beat Greg this week. He's too scared to show up. He's afraid to compete. Sorry, Greg. Why don't we wrap it up with the one thing we wanted to talk about, and I realized we didn't hit it. The Vikings special teams performance in the game against the Eagles was, they showed out with the blocked kick, and I think Ryan Wright, was on the field a lot because we were punting a lot. He had a couple of nice punts. We didn't get to see Greg Joseph. We already know Greg Joseph's an elite kicker for the Vikings. I mean, I think there's no question about that. Any other notes on the special teams, Nick?
Ryan Wright has a great leg, and I always get really scared that he's out kicking his coverage, but the coverage team does a great job getting down there too. So
Yeah.
I think special teams has been really clicking. I mean, it's only 2 game sample, but I really like what I've seen from them so far, especially in the punt game. But also Greg Joseph obviously didn't get to see him as much last week, but nailing that team record tying 56-yarder in week one. It's a good special teams unit so far.
Yeah. All right. Any
And
other final
obviously,
thoughts?
Patrick Peterson can't got to give him the shout out for the 32-year-old blocking a
Yeah.
punt. Maybe he's lost a step, but it certainly hasn't lost his explosiveness off the snap to be able to block a punt. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Too bad
Blocking
we
the
couldn't
field
do
goal
anything
just
with it.
Yeah, blocking the field goal, just like elite explosion to get off of that. Like, it's really hard to do, and the process was probably a little bit slow, but who cares? We're That's gonna wrap it up for us today. We are Kindred Skulls. You can find us at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He's Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Our co-host, who again lost to me in fantasy this week, isn't here, at You've Been Gregg on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us on YouTube. Just search for Kindred Skulls. And we're available on pretty much any podcast platform you could search for. And with that, Nick, I think we're ready to wrap it up. Skull Vikings.
Skull Vikings. Bye. We love you. Goal, baby.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score.